Hey, good afternoon to everybody. Let's start off just right, shall we? Thank you very much for making us a part of your weekend. I appreciate it more than you could possibly know. Remember, when we're here on the air, if you want to send us a text, 260-447-1190. That's 260-447-1190. Or you can drop me an email when I'm on the air or even after we're gone, and that's really easy to do. That's Pat Miller, all one word, no dots or dashes, Pat Miller at WOWO.com. Always glad to hear from you guys, whether you agree with me or not. And right now, I'd say over the course of a lot of the things that we went through last weekend, it's about 50-50, and that's all right. I don't mind people trying to hold me accountable, and I don't get back to everybody every week like I'd like. If you wrote me last week and I haven't gotten back to you, that doesn't mean your response isn't coming. It's just with everything going on around our house. The lovely Mrs. Miller had her birthday this week, with all the health things going on with me and getting set up for another hip surgery. Life has been a little nutty, so I'm trying to pick up some bits of information that are flopping around and trying to pull it all back together. But let's do this. Let's try to get into this. Kamala Harris, who is, of course, the Democrat, who is now the one who's running for president for the Democrat Party of the United States. And, you know, it's kind of funny. 4 years ago, Kamala Harris was one of the Democrats running for office, but yet removed herself from the platform before her very first primary election, which, of course, was going to be the elections there in Iowa, the caucus. And she pulled out. Even though she had spent about $30 million before that caucus, she pulled out because she was convinced she was not going to be able to pull any delegation. And then Joe Biden basically pulled her from obscurity because when it came time to pick a vice president, he reached in and grabbed her and pulled her onto the platform with him. And she now became the first woman vice president of the United States of America. The first woman United States vice president in our country. She says, we believe, this is her talking now, we believe in a future where we lower the cost of living for America's families. Well, in that you say that, that's an awesome thing to say, but it's kind of unusual that we're achieving none of that. None of that seems to be what it is that you're really looking for. Why haven't we pushed for that a little bit here? I mean, some people would say, well, you know, she hasn't done anything that she was supposed to do down on the border. I agree with that. But that aside, say you take that off the plate of accusation. The fact that she hasn't even done what she says they believe about our future. Why hasn't she been working with the current president of the United States to lower the cost of living for your family and for mine? Why has that not already been going on? We're going to talk a little bit about Kamala Harris with Philip Wegman from Real Clear Politics. He is their White House correspondent. He's going to be with us live from the nation's capital there in D.C., and we'll be talking to him about all of this. And then after I finish with him, after the bottom of the hour, we'll pick some of this back up. What does Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have to say about some of the stands that Kamala Harris wants to make for herself? Is she definitely in Kamala Harris's back pocket? Is she there with her, fighting the fight? Is that where AOC is? We'll talk about that and several other things as we go throughout the balance of the day. What does Ben Shapiro say about her? Is she the uniter that she says she is? We'll talk about all of that. And are the Democrats already running for the exit? All this coming up straight ahead right here on WOWO. And welcome back. Glad you guys are with us. We welcome you always here on the Pat Miller program, but especially now. This is that time every Saturday when from Real Clear Politics inside the Beltway, Washington, D.C., from Real Clear Politics, Philip Wegman. He's there with us. Philip, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. You sound like you're a little down the throat there, buddy. You've been putting in long hours, hard times. What's been going on? You had to go over to Paris and run a couple of laps of the 800 or what?
What a lifetime these last few weeks have been. We've been chatting through all of it this summer, just with the start of the presidential debates in Atlanta, then sort of the question of whether or not President Biden would step down, the conventions, the mad scramble for VP. It's been a lot, Pat.
A whole lot. You mentioned something right there. Biden stepping down and the whole thing with the VP and everything. And before we get into the whole thing of an article that you wrote that caught my attention, Swiftboat 2.0, the Trump camp hits Tim Walz over the connection to Kerry. And some people don't have a memory like yours and mine, Philip, so they're going, what? We'll catch them up with it here in a little bit. But you mentioned the fact that whether or not that everything with the president and his stepping back from the ballot, even some in the Democrat Party almost immediately said, well, then shouldn't he also step away? In other words, is this enough that we are getting him off the ballot? Should somewhere along the way, if he's not stepping out of office on his own, should a 25th Amendment kick in? Is that still some scuttlebutt, even from Democrat lips going on around D.C., or has that pretty much been tampered down?
No, the heavy lift was getting President Biden to agree not to run for re-election. And I've got to tell you, Pat, I have not been more confidently wrong about something than that fact. I was convinced coming out of the Atlanta debate that yes, he was diminished, but no, he was not going to step aside. Ultimately, it was his question. It was his question to answer. There was nothing that Democrats could have done other than the 25th Amendment to get him out of there. And so it was surprising to me that he actually decided at the last minute to step aside. And this has been the most ridiculous series of news cycles that I've covered in almost 10 years of news, because what happens, we go from President Biden saying that he will not go quietly into the good night to him doing exactly that, and then Vice President Harris, who we were repeatedly told, not just by Republicans, but also by Democrats, that she was a bad candidate, that she was potentially dead weight, that she needed to be cut. Well, all of a sudden, she is ascendant, and all of a sudden, she's unified Democrats. So not only has a lot happened, there's been a lot of whiplash this summer as well, with the pace of the way things are going.
I don't think there's any question that she is somehow unifying the party a bit behind her, that they're trying to come together. My question to you is twofold, Philip. They're coming together with her based on what? And when is the last time that you saw somebody take over as the lifeboat of a party just before an election? And now she's what, 20, 21 days in as the new Democrat carrying the banner, and she still has not done an interview?
Yeah, she huddled under the wing of Air Force Two in what's called a gaggle, where you have a number of reporters who sort of swarm you and shout questions. But the big answer to one of the questions was she planned on doing a traditional sit-down interview at the end of August. Well, it's already August 8th. She had been the heir apparent of President Biden for more than 3 weeks. She really is avoiding the press. And what has happened in that time? Well, she's had, everything and more that she could have wanted. Vice President Harris has really taken control of the Democratic Party and has enjoyed a lot of momentum. It is the Harris honeymoon currently. And what we have seen is Democratic donors are getting off of the bench. You had different constituencies who were not excited to vote for Biden. Well, now they're back in the game. You have folks from Hollywood, from big tech, elsewhere, who really are rallying around her. And, no offense to the vice president, but frankly, this is not a case of, her pluses or minuses. This is a case where the best thing she has going for her is that she is not Joe Biden, and she's also not Donald Trump. The election has turned once again into a referendum, at least in the minds of Democrats, on beating Donald Trump, and where you had some of these voters who were so discouraged by Biden, they thought that it was a foregone conclusion that he was going to lose, that now, they're back in, and they don't necessarily care a lot about the candidate. They just want to be part of sort of this machine campaign to defeat Donald Trump.
And if that happens, isn't what some of them are saying, because I'm with you. I think a lot of Democrats are doing that. Hey, let's jump back in. Let's be there with the party. Let's just get her elected no matter what. But isn't that basically going back to the idea, if we get her elected, it's just kind of an empty plastic bag of whatever. We don't even know what we're getting, but we've got to live with it now for the next 4 years. That's not a whole lot of hope. I mean, that's not the kind of thing that you dangle out there and America comes rallying and saying, yeah, let's get behind the hefty bag. You know, I mean,
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that if you look at Vice President Harris, she has an accomplished record. She certainly has done a lot before she even became vice president. She was a prosecutor. She was a U.S. senator. But Republicans are quick to point out that she didn't win a single vote on her own. After all, she dropped out of the Democratic primary that I covered back in 2019 before even the first votes were cast in Iowa in 2020.
Right.
One of the things that I think that Republicans sometimes overlook is she is incredibly liberal. She's very progressive, and there is some excitement that she would move fast. But again, I think that in this election specifically, the policy is not as important to the Democratic political machine as it is to finding the standard bearer who can defeat Donald Trump. That said, with the selection of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, it really did put in stark relief, how progressive this ticket is. And the Republicans that I have been talking to inside and outside of the Trump campaign, they were giddy with the Walz selection because while they don't like Harris is a pretty shrewd politician. In the press, we have been dinging her for not doing interviews. But why should she do an interview when she has the momentum, right? I mean, there's a lot of good government transparency reasons why she should meet the press. Mm-hmm. But currently, she's rising in the polls. Tim Walz, though, this is a guy who has a record in Minnesota that is very progressive. You can point to the abortion laws that he has signed. You can point to some of the regulations for illegal immigrants that he put into effect there that allow them to get driver's licenses in that state. His handling of the George Floyd riots. And Republicans are giddy because he moves fast and does things and has a record. And so while Vice President Harris is trying to sort of hunker down and avoid some of her more liberal policy positions previously, in Walz, there are all sorts of examples that Republicans at least think they can point to show that he is her ideological ally. And by going after him, they think that they can make the case that she's an out-of-touch radical. That's their theory of the case.
When I saw your article, it grabbed my attention. This is an article from yesterday, I think, or maybe today, the Swift Boat 2.0. If you folks want to see this, go to realclearpolitics.com and do a search for Philip Wegman, and his articles come up with the most recent first, so this is the first one you'll see. Some people won't understand the Swift Boat 2.0. This is kind of a backhanded reference to John Kerry all the way back in 2004, right?
That's right. And it's fascinating because if you look at Walz's bio, he got into politics because he first served as the veterans coordinator in the state of Minnesota for John Kerry. And John Kerry, of course, his presidential campaign was sunk in large part because of the ads that were run by a group called Swift Boat Veterans for Truth.
Right.
This was a super PAC that doubted his account of his service. And the person who ran that super PAC all the way back in 2004 is Chris LaCivita. Chris LaCivita is the senior Trump advisor. He's sort of co-chair of the, or co-campaign chair, if you will, of the Trump campaign currently. And so they are preparing to run the exact same playbook against Walz 20 years later. And LaCivita told me when I asked him about these sort of, history rhyming situation, he said, quote, "Birds of a feather will be tarred together." And that's what's happened.
Yeah. And that developed because of John Kerry and the thing of supposedly at the Vietnam Wall, he threw his medals over to the other side of the wall and yada, yada, yada. And then it came out, he threw medals over the wall, but they weren't his. they were somebody else's, and people are like, what were you doing? And it basically sank him. It really caused a problem for him. Do you think that this is going to be, I'm trying to think of the best way to ask this. Do you think that there's any hesitation now? I mean, they'd have to eat crow to do it, but do you think now that maybe Kamala wishes she would have waited just a little bit longer to say, yep, he's the one, or that maybe she wishes she would have looked at one candidate further?
So there's a lot of speculation that Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro could have helped her win Pennsylvania, which is going to be a critical battleground state.
Right.
Now, a lot of folks in D.C. will say, if you look at the data, the VP candidate doesn't actually help that much in terms of carrying their own home state. But there's an exception to that long rule, right? And that exception was Joe Biden. He helped Obama carry Pennsylvania, not his home state, but a state he was very familiar with.
He was very closely affiliated with Pennsylvania.
That's right. He helped him elsewhere. And so I think that there was a good case that in a election that came down to, 50,000 votes, that maybe Shapiro could have helped Harris. And frankly, he's no moderate, but he's much more centrist than Walz. So Republicans, they were giddy with this election because in addition to the policy, they wanted to dig into his military record. Now, I can't pass judgment on the swift boat accusations against John Kerry, because in 2004 I was all of 11 or 12 years old, and even today the accusations against him and his military service, Republicans say they were true, Democrats say that they weren't, and some fact checkers that I believe and I trust, they can't quite get to the truth. His record there is up in the air and it's muddied and it's in question. That's John Kerry. One of the things was he did not quickly counter the accusations that, he had exaggerated about his record. Well, when it comes to Walz, there's a lot of material here that is not so suspect. There's basically two issues. The first issue is that he was a 24-year veteran of the Minnesota National Guard, and that he was supposed to be their command sergeant major before they deployed to Iraq in 2006.
Right, and all this is happening just before his unit was deployed.
Exactly.
Right.
And so he had signed, he had enlisted for 6 more years as someone who was going to be the command sergeant major. That's the most senior enlisted rank. But shortly before his unit went to Iraq, Walz did not go. He retired. And so some veterans who were members of that unit, they feel that he abandoned them right before they went to battle. Some members of that unit also are frustrated that Walz represented himself time and time again as the most senior enlisted veteran to serve in Congress. And they say, wait a minute, you can only say that if you were command sergeant major, but you were not of that rank because while you had been conditionally awarded that rank, that was stripped from you, and you didn't retire at that because you didn't go to Iraq, and you also didn't finish these other requirements for that rank. And this is not a world that I understand a lot, but some of the veterans that I speak to, for instance, a representative, Florida Congressman Mike Waltz, similar name but no relation.
Right.
He says that if the Minnesota governor was running around calling himself a command sergeant major, that would be like an officer representing himself as a 1-star general when they were just a colonel. This is something that matters to folks in the military. And so that accusation that he left early and abandoned his unit rather than go with them to Iraq and then continued to represent himself in politics as a command sergeant major, that's something that certainly his political enemies are pointing to, but also some of the men who served in that unit are still upset about even today.
J.D. Vance is quoted in a little short article that's affiliated with CNN under the title Praetorian Guard. J.D. Vance as a messenger on this may be an imperfect messenger because combat correspondent was what his title was, but when you dig a little deeper into that, he was a public affairs specialist, someone who did not see combat, which certainly the title combat correspondent kind of gives you a different impression. Well, that's Breonna Taylor, but now everybody that I've ever heard from whatever network, if in fact they're a combat correspondent, that doesn't mean that they were physically in combat, but they were there on the grounds with those that were. J.D. Vance responded and said, "This is disgusting, and you and your entire network should be ashamed of yourself. When I got the call to go to Iraq, I went." Tim Walz said he carried a gun in a war. Did he? No, it was a lie. Is all of that pretty much in the vein of what it is you're coming to a conclusion?
So that's the command sergeant major and the deployment to Iraq. That's one bucket. The second bucket that you introduced is frankly something that Walz himself stepped in. He made this argument that there should be an assault weapon ban in the United States, and he said explicitly that weapons of war, weapons that he carried, quote, in war, should not be available to American citizens. Well, Vance is arguing, what war did you serve in, Walz? When did you carry a rifle? Because Walz was not in a combat zone. He deployed to Italy, not Iraq. And what Vance has said about his military service is he said that he's never been in a firefight and he's never let on that he has. But, while he did have sort of the MOS of a combat correspondent, he's never told anyone that he was in Iraq in a battle with insurgents, but he was there and he did carry a weapon. And I think that Vance has been pretty straightforward with his record. Walz, on the other hand, for the last couple of decades, he has not disputed it when numerous folks have referred to him as a veteran either of the Iraq War or of Afghanistan. And then his comment about carrying a gun in war, it certainly seems to imply that he led on and was willing to exaggerate, at least sometimes for political gain. And I've got to tell you, I caught the Harris-Walz campaign in another piece of misinformation. When they were countering this argument from Vance, they sent out a statement saying, that Walz had served in the Army National Guard for 24 years, which is true. But then they also said that when he was in Congress, he chaired the Veterans Affairs Committee. The problem is, and we wrote this in a subsequent story, Walz was never the chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee. He was the ranking member, but he wasn't the chairman. And so for the Harris campaign to put that out there and make such a significant gaffe, it sort of allows all of this to snowball, and it does raise more questions about the claims that they have made about his career.
Even though it doesn't sound like much of a difference from this title to that title, are you better as, like, let's say, as the head of the Kamala campaign? Are you not better just to not even say that and say he achieved that title and then later have to back it down and go ahead and just let it go out there and just let everybody find out that it was slightly less than what some have assumed and ascribed to him, and just go ahead and come out with it and this is what it was?
Yeah, and the reason why, Pat, is because this guy served his country honorably. He has a stellar career. Had he not, while running for Congress, referred to himself as a command sergeant major, there wouldn't be a controversy here. Yes, some of the veterans in his battalion that went to Iraq, that they would have a good argument for, perhaps, being upset that he did not deploy with them, certainly. But, he served his country honorably for some time. If he had not made that statement about carrying a gun and a weapon of war, had he not, let on about his rank when he hadn't achieved that, had he not said or his campaign said that he chaired the Veterans Affairs Committee, Republicans wouldn't have anything that they could put a glove on him for, right? It's sort of the extra exaggeration that calls into question.
Yeah, trust me. If the Republicans are going after him for some scurrilous things, that's one thing. But when the Democrats keep taking it and boxing it up and tying it with a bow and laying it in their lap, what do they think they're going to do with it?
Right. And so when they were defending him against these Vance accusations and they set out this statement, it was printed everywhere from the Associated Press to the New York Times and even Real Clear Politics. I was on deadline. I was filing a story Wednesday night at, I think, 11:30 p.m. I saw this quote where they summarized his military career and then noted that he had chaired the House Veterans Affairs Committee. And, I was in a hurry, and so I used that quote. The next morning, though, I had a lot of veterans who were calling me and pointing out that he had not chaired that committee. And also, there are veterans who are pointing out that maybe he exaggerated the command sergeant major rank, that he exaggerated when he said he carried a weapon, in a war. And it's sort of the extra little exaggeration here that I think is going to put him in a difficult situation. And it opens the door for Republicans.
And don't you hate it? Don't you hate it as a journalist when somebody who's part of the story tangentially comes back and says, you might want to check this again because what you're saying here is what they're telling you, but it's not what it was. I hate stuff like that.
Yeah, look, my bias is towards one thing, and that's getting it right. Initially, we were happy with the subsequent scoop when the Harris campaign admitted that they got it wrong, that the staff had made that mistake. For her part, the vice president, she's always gotten it correct. She has not referred to him as a command sergeant major. She has not said that he was the chairman of a committee, that he wasn't. But, the campaign, in a hurry, had to update the bio that they had for him on their website. And, I'm not certain if this is the result of Walz himself exaggerating to the Harris campaign or the Harris campaign just, grabbing a lot of the material that's out there. But this is not helpful. And so Republicans say, look, this is, in their words, a character flaw, and they're going to exploit it. They're going to try and swift boat this guy.
Well, and where Harris is probably really glad is it keeps the Republicans from having to grab onto the thing at the one press thing that she did where she referred to herself as President of the United States. And so that way they don't have to go back and keep hammering that. Keep throwing wall at them. That'll get them. Philip, listen, thank you so much for being with us. There's so much more to cover as it happens and as it comes around. And I've gone over in time. My fault, not yours. You and I just can't keep our mouths shut. That's our problem when we get together. I'm always so glad to have you on, and I look forward again. I think it's going to be interesting to watch how all this plays out as we move ahead. If you were to call it today, I know you hate it when I do this. If you were to call it today, okay, Harris or Trump, who wins? If the vote happens today, who wins?
If the vote happens today, it's way too close to call. I mean, she leads in a lot of these polls. It is a different race. Right now, it's a coin flip, Pat.
Yeah. It all depends on where the electorals are, isn't it?
That's true. That's true. What happens in these 7 battleground states? It's going to come down to it. And frankly, what we've seen from the Trump campaign thus far is, they've been rather lethargic.
Do you think that they're waiting to get their feet underneath all this? I kind of wonder if maybe they've stepped back a little bit. Yeah, and it looks like they're kind of just laying low. But I'm wondering if they've done it just waiting for all this to fetter itself out, and then they'll come out swinging.
So in politics, job number one is defining your opponent before you let them define themselves. And we saw that with some of these questions and attacks against Walz, they were quickly trying to swift boat the guy again. With Harris, however, she has basically been the standard bearer of the Democratic Party for 2 or 3 weeks now. Yes, I know Republicans, they were very excited about running against President Biden. They left the Republican National Convention thinking they had this thing in the bag if they were running against him. But now that he's stepped down, Harris has all of the momentum, and I haven't seen much from the Trump campaign other than a few rallies here and there, where the former president makes reference to her to try and define their opponent. They have a pretty anemic ground game. I'm not certain that these guys are up to the task at a moment when Democrats are really energized.
Yeah, well, and we shall see. Hey, a week from today, you and I hit the ground again. We'll see who is that's gathering around their campaign and who's not, and we'll do it then. Philip Wegman, as always, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Philip Wegman from Real Clear Politics. We talk to him every week, and I'll be back straight ahead. This is Pat Miller here on Mobile 92.3 FM and 1190 AM. When I do that tag, isn't that beautiful when I do that? I mean, it's just...
You crushed it.
It almost... Well, I crush it before it crushes me. So there... Yeah, I told them I'm going to go 18 minutes with you, and that's it. So we did 26 minutes and 16 seconds. So I think that's good. So I just got to make everything else fit. So, all right. Hey, listen, Philip, seriously, thank you so much.
Anytime. Thank you, Pat.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Hey, welcome back. Glad you guys are here. Always glad to have you here as part of the Pat Miller program. And we are just very glad to have you become a part of all that we do here each and every week on the program. So a couple of things I want to go through here in this last half hour, abbreviated a bit as it is because of our time with Philip Wegman. Always appreciate Philip being here. When Kamala said we want to believe in a future where we lower the cost of living for America's families, I guess my point is this. I would believe her verbiage more if I would have seen something out of the actions of her and her boss, current president of the United States, Joe Biden, if in fact they were doing something that would lead us to think that was the pattern that they were holding to. That's where they were going. That's what they were trying to do. And I'm not seeing any of that. It's just kind of surprising to me that the vice president, now the presidential candidate for the Democrats, is pushing this. AOC, as I mentioned to you earlier, that when she picked her vice presidential nominee, that she was picking a uniter, not just for the Democrat Party, but also for the entire United States. Don't listen to what the Democrats are saying now. Listen to what the Democrats were saying based on everything that's been said over the last 3 years. What has been the Democrat view of this man from Utah over the last 3 to 4 years? And it's not been this. It has not been this. And I think that's part of the problem that some people are having with this pick. Certainly some people on the Republican side, but now it seems that also some people on the Democrat side are even having some other difficulties in all of this campaign. If you look at it in the Dumb to Dumber combat area, has J.D. Vance ever been in combat? That's what Nancy Pelosi wants to know. Well, Nancy, the same thing could be said for many people on your side of the aisle, where a lot of them have not stood where they should have stood in a lot of things going on. And why haven't they? Why is it that they've not done that? And that's a question that a lot of people are going to be asking. When all the dust up filters down to ground level, when all the smoke's gone, when all the smoke and mirrors are out of the way, when all of that subsides and the dust clears, what is it that we're left with? What is it that we are left with that will help us to think, yeah, that's really what it is that we're looking at. That really is the kind of guy that we want. That is the one that needs to be the one that takes the vice presidency and leads us to the next part of American greatness. Is it really? I mean, when people that were in his own platoon, his own part of the guard, and he was there really rah, 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 and let's go. I mean, I heard him on a couple of speeches in the last couple of days, and the guy is a firebrand. I mean, he is everything that Ms. Harris is not, and he's certainly everything that the current president of the United States is not. He's definitely a guy. He knows how to get the voice going. He can pump his fist in the air. He can get his bravado up. He can raise the equivalency of getting everybody's attention, and he can do all that. But is he going to be around when you step across the line and you're now ready to go to battle for whatever it was that you said was the most important thing? Are you now ready to step into that future right now? And I'm not sure that's the case. More to cover straight ahead right here on WOWO 92.3 FM, 1190 AM. Hey, welcome back as we finish up this first hour of the Pat Miller program here on this Saturday. Always glad that you guys are with us, and we've started off the month of August quite well together, I think, as we've spent some time together, and we're now getting into the nitty-gritty. I mean, the election's going to be here before we know it. For the last couple of years, we're like, is it ever going to be here? Are the primaries ever going to be here? Will we ever get beyond any of this? Now we've got, parties trying to come together. The Harris-Walz campaign co-chair, Mitch Landrieu, and you remember Mitch Landrieu and the Landrieu family from New Orleans fame, those that, when money was being sloughed around after the hurricanes and the tornadoes and everything that tore up New Orleans, a decade ago, and the Landrieu family was kind of in the midst of all that. Well, Mitch Landrieu is one of the campaign co-chairs for this campaign for Harris-Walz, and he says, we're the party, you see, that actually believes in law and order and the separation of powers and courts doing what they're supposed to do and making sure that nobody is above the law. I don't disagree with that. I'm not sure you really believe that. I mean, don't get me wrong. People say, President Trump has had his problems with the law. Accusations, yes. Yeah, accusations, yes. But are we actually going to see any convictions stand in real time? In the time that they came out, they've already started to fall by the wayside. This is why now you're hearing nothing except who's she picking for her running mate, who's doing this and who's doing that. And they're trying to pick everything that goes on with what it is that happens based on her and her campaigning and her office. Did Joe Biden back out in time? This is what the Democrats are really hoping for. I think it's kind of amazing that Jill Biden has kind of stayed behind the wraps and kept her quiet. Who's running the White House right now, by the way? Because I've always been wondering who is running it now anyway. Was it really Joe Biden? Did we really, genuinely, truly believe that Joe Biden was running the White House? I don't think I thought it. When the guy can't climb the stairs, when he can't finish a sentence, when he messes up, even when he's using a teleprompter on a very short presentation, when he's afraid to come out and to make, some comments and everything, and he's afraid to do it on his own. And people say, maybe she's already been behind the scenes. Kamala Harris, has already been behind the scenes running everything. I don't think so. Kamala Harris is afraid to come out and get off the teleprompter on her own. With Joe Biden, it has been a case of afraid that he would run it on his own without the teleprompter. And now that he's kind of out of the picture, now she's there and she's running it. But can she do it? She's doing nothing. We're 21 days, 22 days into this campaign, and she still has not had a press conference. She has not had a sit-down interview. Why? Well, because you can't preload the answers into your teleprompter if you don't know what it is you're going to tell the teleprompter to help you with. I mean, right? Isn't that what we're up against here? I think it really is a problem, and I think really that the president and the vice president and her running mate are going to be in a world of hurt if they don't come out from under all this, and they come out from under it in the very near future. I'm not real sure that it's what it's supposed to be, and I'm not real sure that they're painting this the way they needed it to be painted. We've got more coming up after the top of the hour. News is coming up, and after that, we're going to pick this up on the other side, and I want to talk about this and what it is that should be on the record. You've got the president can't go on the record. You got the vice president not really wanting to go on the record. What should be on the record? That comes up after our conversation with Marlin Stutzman, straight ahead, right here on WOWO 92.3 FM, 1190 AM.
Podcasts by Federated Media.